I say this as somebody who grew up in New Jersey and share a culture with Trump. I'm gonna explain this perfectly. He has a Cosa Nostra philosophy. It's territorial. He's got his family. They got theirs, and there may be issues between us where our boundaries abut, but generally speaking, so long as you respect the boundary, there'll be peace. And that is the Trump philosophy. It is not built around a maintenance of an international system sustained by American hard and soft power and the rule of law and international treaty that is the culmination of really hundreds of years of advancement in human progress. It's an extraordinary thing to behold in 2023. But I wanted to I wanted to ask in Ukraine, the Russian army has sustained, in some media accounts, 500,000 casualties. Its officer corps has been decimated. Um, what is the Russian capacity to keep fighting? What is the Ukrainian capacity to keep fighting? And what does a ceasefire line look like in Ukraine that stops the war or holds it in place for some period of time? Or do you subscribe to the notion that Zelensky holds, that he will liberate every inch of Ukrainian territory held by Russians, which is an American in a position I deeply appreciate, but I wonder if it is achievable and whether the entire weight of America's national security and foreign policy position should be behind something that is not achievable.
So this will sound paradoxical, but the war will be over when the Russians feel they can't win. So the war will end when the Russians go home, when they feel they've lost, when they give up the idea of conquering all of Ukraine. And when that happens, I can't tell you exactly when and how that will happen, but we will know it. Like there will be whether it will be Putin will change, or there will be a leadership change, or there will be some change, political change in Russia, not necessarily regime change, but just a change of movement. The moment when they decide they don't want to do it anymore is when the war is over. And I think at that moment, then we can negotiate where the borders will be.
Are we getting there?
So the only way we can get there is for Russia to run out of steam, out of energy, out of people, out of ammunition. We could get there, and I've just been to Ukraine. Actually, I went right before New Year's, in December. And if we can continue to help Ukraine, if we can help Ukraine build up its defense industry, if we can help Ukraine create a professional, long-term, long-standing army, which is what they're trying to do now. If we convince the Russians that we aren't going to leave, that we will be there, and not just convince them, tactically or in a narrative way, but convince them because it's true. Then it is a matter of time before the Russians begin to ask, what are we doing this for? There is, it's not Russia. It's, we are not winning. We are not winning hearts and minds. We are not conquering territory that it will then be easy to hold. And so the victory depends a lot on whether, we can win both. It's both a military battle and a psychological battle. We convince the Russians that we aren't leaving, we are staying. We do stay. We help Ukraine create a permanent, kind of a permanent war economy, if you will. I mean, the Ukrainians sometimes talk about Israel in the sense of, being, or South Korea, being a state that is permanently ready to defend itself. If we help Ukraine become that, then I think, that will help end the war. I mean, the Ukrainians had hoped for some kind of victory, perhaps involving Crimea, that would, that would be the blow that would convince the Russians to leave. Maybe they'll achieve that and maybe they won't. There was more hope for that a few months ago than there is now. But it's still about holding on and holding out and convincing the Russians to go home. And, literally the war is over when the Russians leave.
And of course, the central reason, looking at the world through Russian eyes and looking at the world through Vladimir Putin's eyes, why on earth would he ever give up and give in with 500,000 casualties when Donald Trump could be elected president in November? So the demand side for the war continuing is the idiocy of the useful idiots in the American Congress and around Donald Trump and Trump himself, whose position really makes it impossible for Putin to walk away, makes it impossible for the country to communicate what it is you are suggesting needs to be communicated. And so we'll probably have at least one more fighting season. And if Trump goes down in the election, probably the lines as the winter starts next year, 24, 25, will be the lines around which, permanent demarcations and ceasefires are negotiated.
It's not the final border isn't what's important. What's important is that it becomes clear that the Russians are leaving and want to end the war. And the reason you can't have a negotiation right now is the reason you can't have a negotiation now is not because, Zelensky is a maximalist and he's, unrealistic and so on. The reason you can't have a negotiation right now is that Putin doesn't want to end the war,
because he believes his position will improve.
He believes his position will improve because if Trump is the president, then Trump will hand over, half or all or some large parts of Ukraine and will no longer defend Ukraine. So literally Trump is playing a huge role in this war just by being the person who Putin is counting on to give him the advantage and let him win.
Let me ask this question as a historian. Is there any American from 1900 forward that has ever played a role as pronounced as the one Trump is playing, the way you just articulated it? So you had Lindbergh in the 30s. He was decorated by Ribbentrop. He wasn't the head of state. Americans forget, though, that the draft was preserved in 1940 by one vote, which would have made it impossible, had we lost the draft in 1940, to have invaded France before probably 1946, which might have made the task impossible. But is there any American who has played a comparable role in support of a foreign dictator's aggression in the way that Trump is right now? I mean, he is the hope of the Russian aggression.
Yeah. I mean, you could put the best comparison to me of the MAGA right is actually to the far left in the sort of pre-war and post-war era. I mean, there were American communists who supported Soviet communism, in all kinds of ways. The difference, of course, is that none of them ever had any power or any significant power. Right. And so, they were in favor of an autocratic dictatorship that wanted to defeat the United States, but they weren't in any position to bring that about. What's different and unusual and new about Trump is that he's somebody who favors the aims and beliefs of a foreign dictatorship that wants to defeat, American allies. And he's in a position to influence that and affect it. So in that sense, he's worse than they are.
Do you think that Ukraine will become a nuclear power?
I don't know. It's certainly an interesting historical puzzle. Had Ukraine been allowed to keep its nuclear weapons, after the fall of the Soviet Union, would we be having this war now? My guess is that we would not. And of course, everyone around the world is also, this is another reason why everybody's watching the outcome of this conflict. You know, if Ukraine is to lose because it gave up its nuclear weapons, then what is the incentive for anybody to give up nuclear weapons ever again or to not acquire them? You know, why wouldn't South Korea want nuclear weapons? Why wouldn't Japan want nuclear weapons? You know, why wouldn't Taiwan want nuclear weapons? I mean, I'm not saying these are countries that all have the ability to obtain them, but this is another issue that's at stake in this war. You know, if we gave Ukraine in the 1990s, we and the British and the Russians actually gave Ukraine this guarantee of independence and of its borders. In exchange for Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons. I don't know how many Americans know that, but we did. And, you know, were Ukraine to lose its sovereignty and to lose its independence after that, then the incentive for everybody else to get nuclear weapons is suddenly much higher. I mean, that may have happened already.